I found her secret children living in the guest house next door. It was a Tuesday, I think, or maybe a Wednesday. Days blur when you're living on fumes and regret. The air in our two-story in Scottsdale hung thick and humid, even though it was October. I'd just gotten off a brutal conference call, the kind that leaves your teeth buzzing and your soul feeling scraped raw. Sarah was out, supposedly at her book club. She'd been doing that a lot lately. Book club, yoga, me time, all perfectly reasonable excuses, I'd told myself. Until I saw the email. It wasn't even meant for me. A typo, a wrong address, landing squarely in my inbox while I was looking for that damn quarterly report Sarah had promised to forward. A flicker of an email, just a subject line, really, that made my stomach clench. Picnics and playdates, August. August? That was 2 months ago. And the sender? It wasn't one of Sarah's usual book club friends. It was a name I didn't recognize, a man's name. I almost deleted it. My brain, conditioned by years of corporate bullshit, screamed, "Spam!" But something, some primal instinct made me click. And that click, that single stupid click, is where it all started to unravel. Seriously though, if you're finding yourself drawn into this story, if you feel that knot in your stomach, that desperate need to know what happens next, do me a favor, hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And if you haven't already, subscribe. We've got more stories like this, raw and real, coming your way. Drop a comment below too. Let me know what you think. I read them all. Now, where was I? Oh yeah, the email. It was a short thread, really. Just a few exchanges, confirming dates, talking about nap schedules. Nap schedules. It was innocent enough on the surface, the kind of stuff you'd expect from parents coordinating playdates. But the context, the sheer lack of context in my life, made it sinister. Sarah and I, we didn't have kids. We'd tried for years. The fertility treatments, the endless appointments, the crushing disappointment month after month. It had put a strain on us, a silent, heavy weight that we both pretended wasn't there, but it was, always. So the mention of nap schedules felt like a punch to the gut. Whose kids? And who was this guy? I scrolled back through my inbox, a cold sweat prickling my neck. Nothing from the sender before, just this one accidental message. My fingers trembled as I typed the sender's name into Google. The results were sparse. A LinkedIn profile, a small business website, and then a Facebook profile. A man, late 30s, smiling, standing next to a woman with bright laughing eyes, and in front of them, 2 small children. A boy, maybe 5, with Sarah's dark hair. A girl, younger, with that same spark in her eyes. My breath hitched. The girl had Sarah's chin. The boy had my nose. My mind was a battlefield. Denial roared like a tidal wave, trying to drown out the whispers of suspicion. Sarah would never. She couldn't. We'd been through too much. The IVF, the doctors, the pain. This was a mistake, a cruel coincidence. But the faces, they were too much like us, too much like her. I kept staring at the photos, my vision blurring. The woman with the laughing eyes, she looked happy, genuinely, deeply happy. A happiness I hadn't seen in Sarah's eyes for years. Not since before the treatments, before the grief settled in like a permanent resident. I closed the email, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The silence in the house was deafening. I walked into the kitchen, the fluorescent lights humming, making the stainless steel appliances look sterile and cold. I poured myself a glass of water, my hand shaking so badly I spilled some on the counter. I didn't bother wiping it up. I needed to think. I needed to see. I remembered seeing a guest house being built next door a few months back. Sarah had said it was for her parents, who were getting older and wanted a separate space. We were in a good neighborhood, quiet, family-oriented, perfect for raising kids. The thought sent another wave of nausea through me. I walked to the kitchen window, which overlooked our backyard and the fence separating us from the neighbors. The guest house. It was a neat little structure, detached from the main house. I'd barely paid it any mind. Now it felt like a gaping hole in my reality. I paced the kitchen, the floorboards creaking under my weight. What was I doing? Snooping through Sarah's emails? Stalking a stranger's Facebook profile? This wasn't me. But then again, who was I anymore? The man who'd built a successful career, who loved his wife, who dreamt of fatherhood, or this paranoid shell, this hollow echo of a man consumed by doubt? I grabbed my car keys. I had to see. It was a stupid, impulsive decision, born out of a panic I couldn't control. The drive across town felt like an eternity. Every red light, every slow driver was an agonizing delay. I kept replaying the email, the names, the faces. The image of Sarah's dark-haired son, the boy with my nose, was burned into my mind. It was a phantom limb, a missing piece that was suddenly, impossibly, there. When I pulled up to the house, it looked normal. A neat lawn, a 2-car garage, the familiar suburban facade. The guest house was tucked away to the side, almost hidden by a mature oak tree. I parked down the street, my hands still slick with sweat. I got out of the car, my legs feeling like lead. I walked towards the fence, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The fence was about 6 feet high, chain link with some overgrown ivy. I could see into their backyard, a manicured space with a small patio and a child's swing set. And then I saw them. A woman, the one from the Facebook photo, was pushing a little boy on the swing. He was laughing, his legs pumping with pure, unadulterated joy. The little girl was toddling around the grass, chasing butterflies. They looked happy. So incredibly, heartbreakingly happy. And then, the door to the guest house opened. A man stepped out. The man from the photos. He ruffled the boy's hair as he passed him, then knelt to talk to the girl. He looked like a father. A good father. My breath caught in my throat. I watched them for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. The scene played out like a movie, a perfect slice of domestic bliss. And I was the intruder, the voyeur, peering into a life that was both alien and terrifyingly familiar. I saw Sarah then. She was walking towards the patio, carrying a wicker basket. She was wearing sunglasses, but I knew it was her. Her gait, the way she held her shoulders. She looked different, more relaxed than I'd seen her in ages. She was talking to the man, smiling. And then, she picked up the little girl, and the girl threw her arms around Sarah's neck. Sarah hugged her back, a genuine, loving embrace. My blood ran cold. I ducked behind a large bush, my body shaking uncontrollably. This wasn't some book club. This wasn't me time. This was another family. A family that Sarah was a part of. The email wasn't a mistake. It was a roadmap. A roadmap to a life I never knew existed. A life she was living while I was at home, agonizing over failed cycles and the quiet emptiness of our lives. The anger started to build, a slow burn that threatened to consume me. How could she? How could she do this? The lies, the deception, the sheer, utter betrayal. I wanted to scream, to pound on the fence, to demand answers. But I couldn't. I was frozen. A spectator to my own destruction. I saw her kiss the little boy on the forehead, a mother's kiss. And I knew with a certainty that was more devastating than any evidence. Those weren't just play dates. Those were her children, her secret children, living next door. And I, her husband, had no idea. The man's arm went around her, and he pulled her close, and she leaned into him, her face buried in his shoulder. A picture of contentment. A picture of a life I was completely excluded from. The sun glinted off the windows of the guest house, making them seem opaque, impenetrable. What else was hidden behind those walls? What else had she been keeping from me? The weight of it all, the years of unspoken pain, the phantom pregnancies, the hollow ache in my chest. It all crashed down on me at once. I turned and ran back to my car, the image of Sarah's smiling face, her secret children, seared into my retinas. The engine roared to life, and I sped away, the tires squealing on the asphalt. I drove aimlessly, the Scottsdale streets blurring into a kaleidoscope of neon signs and palm trees. Where did I go from here? What did I do now? The silence in the car was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos raging inside me. I was lost, utterly.
completely lost. And I had a feeling this was just the beginning.
The drive back was a blur of adrenaline and sheer disbelief. I found myself on the I-10, heading east, the desert stretching out in every direction. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a beautiful, indifferent spectacle. I glanced at my phone, the screen a harsh blue light in the dimming car. Sarah had texted, "On my way home, almost done with book club. Love you." Love you. The words felt like a cruel joke, a slap in the face. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles white. How long had this been going on? The email was from August, but the children, they looked older than that. Were they younger? Or had this arrangement been going on for years? Years of me living in a bubble while she was building a whole other life, a life filled with the laughter of children I'd never met. The thought was a fresh wave of agony. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of it all. The late nights, the unexplained absences, the emotional distance that had grown between us, a chasm I'd attributed to the stress of our infertility journey. Had it all been a carefully constructed facade? A performance? I remembered a trip we'd taken to San Diego last spring. She'd been distant, preoccupied. She'd said she was tired. Was she meeting them? Meeting him? The questions swirled, each one more painful than the last. I pulled off at the next exit, a deserted service road that led out into the scrubby desert. I parked the car, the engine ticking in the sudden quiet. I got out, the dry desert air hitting my face. I needed to breathe. I needed to escape the suffocating reality of my life. I walked a few yards away from the car, the gravel crunching under my feet. The silence here was profound, broken only by the chirping of unseen insects. I looked up at the vast, star-dusted sky. It felt impossibly huge, impossibly indifferent to my suffering. I thought about the children, their innocent faces, Sarah's loving embrace, and the man who looked like a father. Was he her husband, or something else? Was I just a placeholder, a convenient arrangement? The guilt of even thinking such a thing gnawed at me, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being utterly replaced. I remembered a conversation we'd had a few weeks ago. She'd been talking about a neighbor who was going through a tough divorce. She'd said something about wanting to be supportive, about how some people just needed a fresh start. At the time, it had seemed like idle chit-chat. Now it felt loaded with meaning. Was she talking about herself? Was she planning her own escape? The betrayal was a physical ache, a hollow in my chest that felt like it would never be filled. I kicked a loose rock, sending it skittering across the sand. I thought about confronting her, about demanding the truth. But what if the truth was more than I could bear? What if she told me she loved him? Loved them? The possibility was a knife twisting in my gut. I pulled out my phone again, scrolling through old photos. Us at our wedding. Us on our honeymoon in Maui. Us, smiling, happy, oblivious. Where had that couple gone? When had we started to drift apart? Was it the infertility? Or had this been simmering beneath the surface all along? I leaned against the car, the metal cool against my back. I was trapped between a past I no longer recognized and a future that was a terrifying unknown. The image of Sarah hugging that little girl with her chin, flashed in my mind again. It was a perfect, terrible tableau. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the images, the questions, the pain. But they were relentless, a storm raging within me. I was a stranger in my own life, married to a woman who was living a secret life right next door, and I had no idea what to do. The desert air was growing cold. I needed to go home, back to the house that no longer felt like mine, back to the woman who was no longer the person I thought I knew. I got back into the car, the leather seats still holding the faint scent of Sarah's perfume, a scent that now felt like a lie. I started the engine, the headlights cutting through the deepening darkness. The road ahead was uncertain. The only thing I knew for sure was that nothing would ever be the same again. I had found her secret children, and in doing so, I had found my own secret hell.
I drove back towards the city lights, the weight of my newfound knowledge crushing me. The question wasn't if I would confront her, but when, and what would happen after that. The cliffhanger, I realized with a sickening lurch, wasn't just for the audience, it was my life. The drive back was a blur of adrenaline and sheer disbelief. I found myself on the I-10, heading east, the desert stretching out in every direction. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a beautiful, indifferent spectacle. I glanced at my phone, the screen a harsh blue light in the dimming car. Sarah had texted, "On my way home, almost done with book club. Love you." Love you. The words felt like a cruel joke, a slap in the face. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles white. How long had this been going on? The email was from August, but the children, they looked older than that. Were they younger? Or had this arrangement been going on for years? Years of me living in a bubble, while she was building a whole other life, a life filled with the laughter of children I'd never met. The thought was a fresh wave of agony. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of it all. The late nights, the unexplained absences, the emotional distance that had grown between us, a chasm I'd attributed to the stress of our infertility journey. Had it all been a carefully constructed facade, a performance? I remembered a trip we'd taken to San Diego last spring. She'd been distant, preoccupied. She'd said she was tired. Was she meeting them? Meeting him?
The questions swirled, each one more painful than the last. I pulled off at the next exit, a deserted service road that led out into the scrubby desert. I parked the car, the engine ticking in the sudden quiet. I got out, the dry desert air hitting my face. I needed to breathe. I needed to escape the suffocating reality of my life. I walked a few yards away from the car, the gravel crunching under my feet. The silence here was profound, broken only by the chirping of unseen insects. I looked up at the vast, star-dusted sky. It felt impossibly huge, impossibly indifferent to my suffering. I thought about the children, their innocent faces, Sarah's loving embrace. And the man who looked like a father. Was he her husband, or something else? Was I just a placeholder, a convenient arrangement? The guilt of even thinking such a thing gnawed at me, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being utterly replaced. I remembered a conversation we'd had a few weeks ago. She'd been talking about a neighbor who was going through a tough divorce. She'd said something about wanting to be supportive, about how some people just needed a fresh start. At the time, it had seemed like idle chit-chat. Now it felt loaded with meaning. Was she talking about herself? Was she planning her own escape? The betrayal was a physical ache, a hollow in my chest that felt like it would never be filled. I kicked a loose rock, sending it skittering across the sand. I thought about confronting her, about demanding the truth. But what if the truth was more than I could bear? What if she told me she loved him, loved them? The possibility was a knife twisting in my gut. I pulled out my phone again, scrolling through old photos. Us, at our wedding. Us, on our honeymoon in Maui. Us, smiling, happy, oblivious. Where had that couple gone? When had we started to drift apart? Was it the infertility? Or had this been simmering beneath the surface all along? I lean against the car, the metal cool against my back. I was trapped between a past I no longer recognized and a future that was a terrifying unknown. The image of Sarah hugging that little girl with her chin, flashed in my mind again. It was a perfect, terrible tableau. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the images, the questions, the pain. But they were relentless, a storm raging within me. I was a stranger in my own life, married to a woman who was living a secret life right next door, and I had no idea what to do. The desert air was growing cold. I needed to go home, back to the house that no longer felt like mine, back to the woman who was no longer the person I thought I knew. I got back into the car, the leather seats still holding the faint scent of Sarah's perfume, a scent that now felt like a lie. I started the engine, the headlights cutting through the deepening darkness. The road ahead was uncertain. The only thing I knew for sure
was that nothing would ever be the same again.
I had found her secret children, and in doing so, I had found my own secret hell. The question wasn't if I would confront her, but when, and what would happen after that. The cliffhanger, I realized with a sickening lurch, wasn't just for the audience, it was my life. Driving home was like navigating through a minefield of my own shattered reality. Every familiar landmark, every street sign felt like a mockery. The manicured lawns of our neighborhood, once a symbol of our quiet success, now seemed to mock me with their perfection, a stark contrast to the chaos churning inside me. I pulled into our driveway, the garage door gliding open with its usual mechanical sigh. The house was quiet, eerily so. Sarah's car wasn't there. Book club. Right. The hypocrisy of it all threatened to choke me. I walked through the entryway, the silence amplifying the thudding of my heart. The living room, with its tasteful muted colors and expensive furniture, felt like a stage set for a play I was no longer a part of. The framed photos on the mantelpiece, us smiling at our wedding, us on that ill-fated trip to the Grand Canyon, us at a friend's barbecue, were ghosts of a life that felt impossibly distant, a life I was desperate to reclaim but knew I'd lost forever. I went to the kitchen, the same one where I'd stood earlier that day, staring out the window at the guest house. Now, the emptiness of the refrigerator felt like a reflection of the void that had opened up inside me. I opened a cabinet, pulled out a bottle of bourbon, and poured myself a generous shot. The amber liquid burned its way down my throat, offering a brief, fleeting numbness. I needed more, a lot more. I poured another, then another, my hand shaking with each movement. The alcohol was a weak defense against the onslaught of images and thoughts. Sarah, laughing with the man, holding the little girl. Her children, our children, in a way that twisted my insides. The thought of that boy, the one with my nose, was the hardest to bear. He was my blood, my flesh, a son I'd longed for, a son she'd given away. To whom? To another man, to a life I was excluded from. I wandered into our bedroom, the room we'd shared for 10 years. The bed was neatly made, a testament to Sarah's meticulous nature. Her side of the closet was full of her clothes, her perfume bottles lined up on the dresser like tiny soldiers. It was all still here, the outward appearance of our life. But the essence, the intimacy, the trust, that was gone, erased. I sat on the edge of the bed, the springs creaking under my weight. I thought about confronting her tonight, right now, as soon as she walked through the door. But the thought of her face, the inevitable explanation, the lies she would undoubtedly spin, I couldn't bear it. Not yet. I needed time to process this, to armor myself against whatever was coming. The bourbon was starting to make my head spin, but it was a welcome escape from the clarity of my pain. I walked over to her nightstand, my gaze falling on her jewelry box. It was an antique, something she'd inherited from her grandmother. I'd always loved the intricate carvings on its lid. On impulse, I opened it. Inside, nestled amongst her delicate necklaces and earrings, was a small, tarnished silver locket. It wasn't something I'd ever seen her wear. Curiosity, that insidious serpent, coiled in my gut. I picked it up. It was surprisingly heavy. I fumbled with the clasp, my fingers clumsy from the alcohol. It sprang open. Inside were two tiny, faded photographs. On one side, a younger Sarah, her eyes bright and full of youthful exuberance, holding a baby I didn't recognize. And on the other side, the same baby, now a toddler, clutching a brightly colored toy. My breath hitched. This wasn't from August. This was old, very old. Who was this baby, and why had Sarah kept it hidden? The email had confirmed a present-day deception, but this hinted at a past I knew nothing about, a past Sarah had deliberately erased. Was this the beginning? Was this the first child? My mind raced, trying to connect the dots. If this baby was hers, then the children next door, they couldn't be her only secret. My heart hammered against my ribs. I felt a surge of something akin to panic. It wasn't just about infidelity, it was about a whole secret life, built on a foundation of lies. I snapped the locket shut, my hand trembling. I put it back in the jewelry box, trying to reassemble the facade,
the outward appearance of normalcy. But the damage was done. I had a glimpse behind the curtain, and the reality was more terrifying than I could have imagined. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway jolted me. Sarah. My stomach clenched. I quickly put the jewelry box back on the nightstand, trying to appear nonchalant, though I knew I was radiating unease. The front door opened, and her voice, bright and cheerful, called out, "Honey, I'm home." It was the voice of a woman coming home from book club, not the woman who was living a double life. I walked out of the bedroom, trying to school my features into something resembling calm. She was standing in the entryway, her purse slung over her shoulder, a stack of books in her hand. She smiled, a warm, familiar smile that now felt like a mask. "Rough call?" she asked, gesturing to my disheveled appearance. I hadn't even realized how I looked. My suit was rumpled, my tie loosened. I'd clearly had more than just a couple of shots of bourbon. "Yeah," I managed, my voice rough. "Just a long day." She walked towards me, her eyes scanning my face. "You okay? You look a little pale." I forced a smile. "Just tired. You know how it is." She nodded, her expression softening with concern. "I do. Well, book club was interesting. We debated the symbolism of the bluebird for like an hour." She laughed, a light, airy sound. It grated on me. How could she be so normal, so oblivious? Or was she not oblivious at all?
Was this all an act? I watched her as she moved through the house, putting away her books, tidying up things I hadn't even noticed were out of place. Every movement, every word, felt like a performance. I sat down on the couch, the bourbon swirling in my gut. I needed to know. I needed to confront her, but not here, not now, not with her acting like this. It would be like arguing with a ghost. I thought about the locket, the baby, the children next door. The questions were a relentless tide, threatening to drown me. So, I started, my voice still a little shaky. "How are the Johnsons doing next door? I haven't seen them around much lately." Sarah paused, her back to me as she opened the refrigerator. "Oh, they're fine," she said, her tone casual. "They're actually traveling for a few weeks. Some family emergency, I think." Traveling, but I'd seen them. I'd seen Sarah with them, with her children, just hours ago. My mind reeled. Were they not the Johnsons? Was she referring to a different family? Or was she lying again? The elaborate nature of the deception was staggering. It was a labyrinth of lies, and I was lost within it. "That's too bad," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. I was hoping to maybe say hello. Sarah closed the refrigerator door and turned to face me, a slight frown on her face. "Why? Is something wrong?" Her eyes narrowed, her gaze sharpening. She was on to me, or at least she sensed something was off. The carefully constructed normalcy was cracking. No, nothing's wrong," I said quickly, holding up my hands defensively. "Just, neighbors. Thought I'd check in." She didn't look convinced. She walked over to me, perching on the edge of the coffee table, her expression unreadable. "You're acting strange," she said, her voice softer now, but with an edge of suspicion. "Did something happen at work?" I couldn't lie anymore. Not about this. The weight of it was too heavy. I looked at her, at the woman I'd loved, the woman I'd built a life with, and I saw a stranger who had betrayed me in the most profound way imaginable. "Sarah," I began, my voice barely a whisper. "I saw something today, something I shouldn't have seen." Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her face. "Fear? Guilt? What did you see?" she asked, her voice barely audible. I took a deep breath, the words catching in my throat. "I saw you at the guest house next door, with children." The confession hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Sarah's face drained of color. Her hands, which had been resting on the table, clenched into fists. The practiced calm she'd maintained all evening shattered. Her eyes, once so warm and loving, now held a chilling mixture of panic and something else, defiance. She stood up, her movements jerky, almost frantic. You were spying on me?" Her voice was laced with accusation, a desperate attempt to turn the tables. "No, Sarah," I said, my voice gaining strength, the bourbon finally giving me a courage I didn't possess sober. "I wasn't spying. I got an email, an accidental email. And then I saw you, with them, your children." The word hung in the air, a bomb that had just detonated. Her composure completely disintegrated. Tears welled up in her eyes, not tears of sadness, but tears of a cornered animal. They're not just mine," she stammered, her voice breaking. They're his." The confession, so blunt, so raw, was like a physical blow. His. The man from the photos. The man who looked like a father. The man who was part of her secret life. "And you didn't think I deserved to know?" I asked, my voice rising with a fury I hadn't known I possessed. "You didn't think your husband, the man you married, the man who has spent years wanting to be a father, deserved to know that you were living a lie?" She flinched at my words, but didn't deny them. "It's complicated," she whispered, her gaze fixed on the floor. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me, Sarah," I demanded, standing up and stepping towards her. "Tell me what it is. Tell me who he is. Tell me who they are." She finally looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and pleading. "You don't understand," she choked out. "You can't. It would destroy everything." "Everything is already destroyed, Sarah," I said, my voice hollow. "You destroyed it. You built a secret life, a secret family, right next door, and you expected me to just keep living in the dark?" The silence that followed was deafening. The air crackled with unspoken truths and a pain so profound it was suffocating. I saw her glance towards the bedroom, towards her nightstand, and a cold dread washed over me. She knew I'd seen the locket, the baby, the past. The foundation of her deception was far deeper than I'd imagined. "What about the locket, Sarah?" I asked, my voice low and dangerous. "What about the baby in the pictures?" Her breath hitched. Her face paled even further, if that was possible. Her carefully constructed world was crumbling around her, and I was the architect of its destruction. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her eyes darted around the room as if searching for an escape. Then, with a sudden, desperate movement, she turned and bolted towards the back door. "Sarah, wait!" I shouted, but she was already out, her figure disappearing into the deepening twilight. I ran after her, my heart pounding with a mixture of rage and a desperate need for answers. She was running, but I was chasing a ghost, a phantom of the woman I thought I knew. And the truth I was beginning to realize was far more complex and terrifying than I could have ever imagined. The night air was cool, but I was burning with a rage that had been simmering for years, fueled by unspoken grief and a gnawing emptiness I'd always attributed to our inability to conceive. Now, that emptiness had a name, a face, a whole damn secret life. I sprinted across the lawn, the manicured grass slick with dew under my bare feet. Sarah was a blur in the gathering darkness, her silhouette a desperate figure against the backdrop of suburban twilight. She ran towards the street, towards the unknown, towards whatever twisted reality she'd constructed for herself. I was close behind, my lungs burning, my legs pumping with a raw, primal energy. I didn't want to catch her. Not really. I wanted her to stop. I wanted her to turn around and face me, to finally, truly face the wreckage she'd made of our lives. She reached the curb, fumbling with the lock on her car door, the one parked in our garage just hours ago. It was her sensible sedan, the one she'd always insisted on, practical and unassuming. Now it felt like a getaway vehicle. I was almost on her. "Sarah, stop!" I yelled, my voice hoarse, raw. She finally got the door open, her movements frantic. She threw herself inside, the engine roaring to life almost instantly. I reached the car just as she slammed it into reverse, tires squealing on the asphalt. I lunged, my hand grasping for the door handle, but it was too late. She was gone, a streak of taillights disappearing around the corner. I stood there, panting, the adrenaline coursing through me, leaving me shaky and hollow. The silence of the street was deafening, broken only by the distant hum of traffic. I felt an overwhelming wave of exhaustion wash over me, the fight draining out of my limbs.
I was alone again, standing in the same place where I'd just seen the embodiment of my betrayal speed away. I walked back to the house, the porch light casting long, distorted shadows. The front door stood ajar, a gaping maw leading into the ruins of my life. I stepped inside, the scent of Sarah's perfume still lingering in the air, a ghost of a memory. The living room was exactly as I'd left it, the framed photos on the mantelpiece, silent witnesses to a love story that had imploded. I walked over to the coffee table, my eyes landing on the locket Sarah had left behind. It was still open, the two tiny photos staring up at me. The baby, the toddler, a tangible piece of her hidden past, a past that was now undeniably intertwined with my present. I picked it up, turning it over in my fingers. Who was this child? When had Sarah become a mother, and to whom? The email had spoken of children born in August, but these photos, they were much older, years older. This wasn't just about an affair. This was about a life, a significant chunk of a life, lived in complete secrecy. The weight of it all pressed down on me, an unbearable burden. I sank onto the couch, the silence of the house pressing in on me. I thought about the guest house, about the laughter I'd heard, about the glimpse I'd had of Sarah's secret world. Children, her children, a son, a daughter, and I had no idea who their father was.
Or perhaps more disturbingly, if I'd already known him. Was he someone I'd seen around? Someone we'd socialized with? The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. I stayed like that for a long time, adrift in a sea of confusion and despair. The bourbon had worn off, leaving me with a dull ache behind my eyes and a hollowness in my chest. The silence was broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, each tick a measured march towards an unknown future. I finally forced myself to stand, the decision solidifying in my mind. I needed to know everything. I couldn't live with this half-truth, this fractured reality. I grabbed my keys, my phone, and a jacket, the cool night air biting at my skin as I stepped back out into the darkness. The Johnsons' house loomed before me, a silent, imposing structure. The lights were off, the windows dark. They were traveling, Sarah had said. But what if they weren't? What if this was all a carefully orchestrated lie, designed to keep me from the truth? I walked up the driveway, my heart pounding. I reached the front door, hesitating for a moment. Was I ready for what I might find? For what I might have to see? Taking a deep breath, I rang the doorbell. The sound echoed in the stillness, a small, insignificant noise in the vast expanse of my unfolding crisis. I waited, my nerves frayed. No answer. I rang again, longer this time. Still nothing. A flicker of doubt, then a surge of determination. I looked around the side of the house, my gaze falling on the familiar, albeit slightly weathered, guest house. The one I'd seen Sarah go into, the one where I had heard the children's laughter. It was still there, a silent sentinel to her secret. I walked around to the side, my steps tentative. A faint light emanated from one of the windows. It was a soft, warm glow, illuminating a sliver of the room within. I crept closer, my breath catching in my throat. I peered through the gap in the curtains. The scene inside was surreal, a tableau of domestic normalcy that ripped through me with the force of a physical blow. A woman was sitting on the floor, surrounded by building blocks, patiently helping a little girl stack them higher. The girl had a bright, infectious smile, her laughter a soft murmur that I could somehow hear even through the glass. Beside her, a young boy, perhaps 5 or 6, was engrossed in a picture book, his brow furrowed in concentration. He looked up, his eyes, my eyes undeniably, meeting mine through the glass. My heart stopped. It was him, the boy from the email, the boy with my nose. He looked confused for a moment, then his face broke into a wide, innocent grin. He pointed at me, saying something to the woman, who turned to look. It was Sarah. Not the Sarah who had lied to me, who had built a secret life, but a Sarah I almost recognized. A mother. A warm, gentle smile touched her lips as she saw me. She didn't flinch. She didn't run. She simply looked at me, her gaze steady, her expression one of quiet resignation. She put a hand on the boy's shoulder, murmuring something to him. The little girl looked up too, her wide, curious eyes taking me in. It was overwhelming. A scene of a family I had never known, a family that was undeniably mine, unfolding before my eyes. The woman, Sarah, stood up slowly. She hesitated for a moment, then walked to the door of the guest house and opened it. The sound of her voice, soft and clear, cut through the night. "Come in," she said. It wasn't an accusation, not a plea. It was an invitation. I stepped across the threshold, into the warmth of the small house. The air was filled with the sweet scent of children's shampoo and something vaguely floral. The boy, my son, watched me with an intense, unblinking stare. He clutched his book tighter, a silent question in his eyes. The little girl, Sarah's daughter, peeked out from behind Sarah's legs, her expression a mix of shyness and curiosity. I looked at Sarah, at the woman who had held this secret for so long. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but there was a quiet strength in her gaze now. The fear had receded, replaced by a weary acceptance. "They're beautiful, Sarah," I said, my voice rough with emotion. It was an understatement. They were more than beautiful. They were a miracle, a living, breathing testament to a life I'd been denied. Tears pricked at my eyes, blurring my vision. Who is their father?" I finally managed to ask, the question I'd been carrying since I'd first seen that email. Sarah took a deep breath, her shoulders slumping slightly. She looked at the boy, my son, his face open and trusting. Then she looked at me, her gaze direct and unwavering. "You know who their father is," she said softly. The words hung in the air, a bewildering pronouncement. I stared at her, my mind reeling. I knew. How could I know? Then it hit me. The man in the photos, the man who looked like a father. He wasn't just some random guy. He was me, or rather, a version of me. A version of me from years ago, a younger me. I saw it then, the faint resemblance in the boy's eyes, the shape of his jaw, the way he tilted his head. It was undeniable. I was their father. My own children. My own secret children. The shock was so profound, so absolute, that it left me breathless. I staggered back a step, my hand flying to my mouth. Sarah reached out, her hand hovering near my arm, but not quite touching. "It was a long time ago," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Before us, before we were married, I was young, and I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. And then I couldn't bring myself to tell you. I was so afraid of losing you." Her story tumbled out then, a torrent of fear, regret, and desperate hope. She'd been young, barely out of college. A brief, intense relationship that ended abruptly. She discovered she was pregnant, and in her panic, she'd made a choice.
A choice that had shaped her life and mine in ways neither of us could have imagined. She'd moved away, had the baby, and then when she'd finally met me, she'd made another choice. A choice to build a future with me, a future she desperately wanted to keep intact. She'd kept the children a secret, placing them with a trusted family, the Johnsons, who were in fact her parents, discreetly helping her maintain the illusion. Her parents had been her lifeline, her co-conspirators in this elaborate charade. They'd watched the children grow, ensuring they were loved and cared for, while Sarah built her life with me, all the while carrying the immense burden of her secret. The August email, she explained, was from a situation where she'd temporarily taken over care for the children due to a family crisis, a rare deviation from the norm that had led to my accidental discovery. "But the children next door?" I finally managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. "The ones I saw you with today?" Her gaze softened, a flicker of something akin to relief crossing her face. "Those are my niece and nephew," she explained, "my sister's children. They were staying with my parents, and I was helping out. They look a lot like my son." She gestured towards the boy, who was now watching us with a quiet intensity. He was so much like me. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. I looked at him, this small, innocent boy, who was so completely unaware of the seismic shift happening in his life. And I looked at Sarah, the woman I had loved, the woman who had carried this immense secret for so long. The betrayal still stung, a deep, raw wound, but it was now overlaid with a profound sense of shock and a dawning comprehension. She hadn't been having an affair. She hadn't been building a life with another man. She had been protecting a past,
a past that involved me, a past that involved our children. So, the email, it was a mistake? I asked, still trying to piece it all together. Yes, she confirmed, her voice firm. A mistake. Someone in my parents' office sent it to the wrong address. I'd been arranging for some temporary childcare for them because my sister needed help. It wasn't supposed to go to you. When you saw it, I panicked. I tried to cover it up, to pretend it was something else. I thought if I just kept it together, if I just acted normal, it would go away. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. I was so scared, Mark, so terrified of losing you, of losing the life we'd built. I thought telling you would destroy everything. I walked over to the boy, my legs feeling heavy, unsteady. He looked up at me, his expression curious. I knelt down, my knees protesting. Hey, buddy, I said, my voice trembling. He offered a shy smile. My name is Leo, he said. Leo, my son. The name felt both foreign and profoundly familiar.
I looked at him, at the innocence in his eyes, the untainted joy in his smile, and something shifted within me. The anger, the betrayal, the years of pain, they began to recede, replaced by a different kind of emotion. A fierce, protective love that surged through me, powerful and unexpected. I reached out, my hand hesitant, and gently ruffled his hair. He leaned into my touch, a small, contented sigh escaping his lips. I looked over at Sarah, at her hopeful, anxious face. The facade was gone. The lies were out in the open. We stood there, in the quiet intimacy of this small house, with our children. Two strangers bound by a shared past and an uncertain future. The journey ahead was going to be long, impossibly difficult. There were years of trust to rebuild, a family to truly understand, a life to redefine. But for the first time since I'd seen that email, I felt a flicker of something other than despair. I felt a fragile, nascent hope. I looked at Leo, at his bright, curious eyes, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was home. We need to talk, I said to Sarah, my voice steady, though my heart was still racing. Everything. We need to talk about everything. She nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek, a tear that spoke of release, of relief, and of a dawning new reality. The night was still dark, but for the first time, I could see a faint light on the horizon. It wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't a neat, tidy ending. It was just the truth. Raw, messy, and incredibly, terrifyingly real. And it was ours to navigate, together.